Hey, welcome everyone. Thanks for joining us again for another episode of Going Elliptic, our charted series. Last week we looked at a number of different assets, got some great feedback there of what people liked, how they were learning different momentum indicators and things there. So this week we're going to dive even deeper into a few different assets, but before we do, just a reminder, this is educational content. We want you to learn something. There's no investment advice at all in this kind of live stream recording. And yeah, as much as possible, if you like something or you want to see more of anything, please do give us a thumbs up and comment, leave us comments, because that's how we're going to grow both the community and also give you what it is that you want to see. All right. Hey, Shanky.
How are you doing, Paul?
Yeah, good. Getting into the swing of things with these recordings, and yeah, definitely loving the audience engagement too.
Absolutely, yeah. And we had a great guest early on today, which was Swapman. For those who missed it, of course, go to our channel and go watch that. There's a lot of fun stories and tips and tricks that he shared in his excellent journey.
Yeah, that's an impressive 10-year journey in crypto. So really one of the OGs, and I mean, we could have talked for hours. That was great.
Absolutely.
Cool. So for Charted today, I know you've got some assets lined up. Where do you want to start?
Yeah, so we did a sort of a first edition last weekend, and the idea was both to cover a few assets, but at the same time also introduce a few concepts, right? How to read the charts, what to look for, what not to look for. And so we'll continue on that journey. We'll try to keep it short. Let's keep about 20-30 minutes and no more. And so it'll be good to start with the majors, as always. BTC and ETH are the king and queen, as Swapman said earlier today. So we'll look at the king and the queen, and then from there we'll go to some of the other things that have been generally been in the conversations in the crypto world, from swaps to DeFi to everything else that is happening at the chains and so on and so forth. So we'll pick up a few. We can't pick too many, but we'll pick about 3-4 of them and see them and study them and see what we can find out.
Great. Yeah, let's start with the majors. And obviously, we've seen some new all-time highs in this past week.
Yeah, absolutely. So let's begin with, I guess, BTC. I mean, BTC reached a complete new level, breaking the 60,000 mark, right? And of course, there has been a lot of excitement with BTC potentially going even higher. But let's just look at the charts and see what the charts are saying, right? What is it that we can learn here? So again, I've pulled up the, sort of one of the standard charts using TradingView again, this time for demonstrating. The data is available, the charts are, easy to understand. So I think this is one of the easier, good ones for most people. If you look at this chart, you will see that starting March 7th, which is around the time we did the last show, we did actually March 8th, I think about a week back, the price has been going up, and up. So, it's very clear sort of a trend here. It's a straight up parabolic growth. If we start looking at, a little bit more of the, hourly time frames, let's see how the price has moved. Here we see in the hourly time frame as well, there has been a fair amount of volatility, but overall sort of upward movement. Definitely more recently, after the current push all the way up to 60,000 plus, there has been a little bit of profit taking. You see that there is a little bit of retracement of price, and that's only expected. When you reach an all-time high, usually it's hard to kind of just stay there. And so this is a little bit of a correction, but the overall trend still seems up. Things are just moving up, and up. So don't see this changing, at least for now. There is nothing in the market that's indicating that this is, cooling down. Similarly, if you look at ETH, I think the story is also clear. Let's just look at the day chart here. We're not going to dig in too much into either of these today. but see, it's tracking above the 20 EMA. Very clear, strong upward trend. Earlier today, we see some, red candles emerging, a little bit of price correction. But again, in the grander scheme of things, it's a very strong upward momentum. So the bull market is strong. There is nothing that shows here, at least in the chart, that things are weakening. Of course, barring some small corrections here and there, which is just part of the game. That's how the market moves.
Yeah, and one thing I noticed there is very highly correlated still between Bitcoin and Ethereum. In this case, it looked like Bitcoin moved a little bit first, but yeah, are you seeing that correlation likely to hold true?
Yeah, that's a very good question. The correlation has always been, Bitcoin sort of paves the road and then others follow, and ETH usually follows right behind. So that's been at least the story from the price, if you just look at the price. But also, I think in this particular case, the interesting story is that we saw a little bit of divergence early on in the week. If you look at this period, somewhere around the early March period, we saw Bitcoin correcting a little bit, and there were doubts whether the upward momentum would be questioned. ETH at that same point in time was actually moving up and moving strong, or at least staying steady for the most part. But then I think both have again come back, in the same fashion. Bitcoin, of course, has seen some bigger movements, and it has also broken one of its new all-time high, which is the new 60,000 plus mark. ETH hasn't broken its all-time high. We saw it touch almost 2,000 early on in Feb, and it's very close to it. It's sort of hovering it. My sense is that both of them will continue to go up further, unless, of course, things change. Now, things can change. There is, never say never, because a lot of this is just really, in some sense, supply and demand driven. There is really no other big driver behind the scene that is justifying this price. So, if the demand and supply shift in some other direction, you're definitely going to see some correction here. But from the charts, yeah, it just looks like they're going strong and they're going up for now.
Great. So one of the other things that we covered last week and was also interesting to compare was between UNI and Sushi. So let's look at the swaps and this time include cake.
Yeah, absolutely. So UNI and Sushi have been essentially the drivers for a lot of adoption, really. If you start looking at what's been happening in the world of crypto last year, for the most part, I think a lot of the core users of crypto have really been in this world of DeFi and swaps and decentralized exchanges. And UNI, of course, has led the way there, where we started seeing volumes upwards of $1 billion a day. And then Sushi came along, and Sushi also saw a lot of traction. And then more recently, we saw the emergence of the Binance chain, which is being positioned as a competition to Ethereum, and CakeSwap is the leader there, right? So, or PancakeSwap rather, that's the full name of that venue, and of course the token is Cake. So that has been the new sort of kid in the block in the swap space, and it'll be good to sort of compare them and see how they are performing. If you look at UNI, just purely from the charts again, it's been going up. I think it's riding the same wave, the same broader crypto wave. But also since February, you start seeing some larger movements. So here you see a pretty large movement here back on February 20th. I think we covered this last time when we spoke. And then after a little bit of correction, right, which came down towards the end of February, early March, the movement is again strong. And in fact, here, if you look at the chart, there have been at least 3 very big moves. So, 3 moves here where we start seeing the candles becoming fairly strong, right? So big, huge candles here. There is one big movement here. There's another one here and a third one here. So there are 3 days of fairly aggressive price movements upward, showing that the buyers are in control. People are still very bullish about UNI. And then, of course, we saw a little bit of range-bounded moves, a little bit of correction down here. But all said and done, the trend is very strong, and UNI remains a very strong player. The current movement this coming week is a little unclear. The question will be, can it break out of this zone, right? Can it move up further, or is it going to see a little correction down here? My sense is that it will definitely respect the 20 EMA, so it is not going to go anywhere below this line, so to speak. But again, these are not things which are confirmatory. These are things which are just indicative. So we'll see. We'll see how this moves, and what's the overall direction as we start moving ahead. So that's the Uni story. Uni seems in good shape and continues to move strong. Now let's look at sushi and see if sushi is looking any different. Now, if you look at sushi, sushi has also been going pretty strong. Sushi, in fact, started the story with launching the token before Uni, and it was very well received, and it saw a big growth period through January and February, where it just kept on going up, and we saw it with very long wicks at a certain point in time. If you start looking at these days or these periods, the wicks were very long, which in other words basically says that there was a big amount of volatility, but not necessarily there was confirmatory, like one side buyers or sellers in control. People were trying to test the waters and figure out where the price should be, and now it has sort of definitely being determined that it remains a strong uptrend. So these things are pretty clear. You can just sort of see it with your eyes. You don't even have to chart anything. But what would be good to do is maybe we can add in one of the indicators, a momentum indicator, let's say Bollinger Bands, and see what the indicator tells us. And then of course we will also look at, one second, let me just add this in. So okay, there you go. So the Bollinger Band's added to this. Now, before I start talking a little bit about what Bollinger Band is saying with respect to sushi, I think it's worthwhile to just try and understand what the Bollinger Band is. So the Bollinger Band is a momentum indicator, pretty much the same class of indicators that RSI is, or for that matter, even MACD is. These are all tracking one way or the other. They all have their own different formulas, all different, sort of approaches. But each one of them is essentially looking at how much is the market moving, right? So is there big volatility? Is there a big amount of jump? Are there large moves? Are there small moves, right? And what it's also trying to measure is, are there large moves which are very bullish moves, or are there large moves with very bearish moves? Just sort of also in some sense giving the traders a sense of, how fast is the market moving and how far is it moving. So the Bollinger Band is very convenient because it really creates a nice channel, which is the upper sort of a channel here. If I'm just sort of moving my cursor over this, so this is the, pardon me with this, the upper channel here, this particular line, and then there is the lower channel here, which is the other line. And what these two are really tracking is a couple of standard deviations away from a 20 period moving average. So it's not a 20 period EMA, which is what I have plotted here, but the 20 period MA, which is a moving average. And I can take this out just to make it clearer, because I think there are too many things on this chart at the moment, which is always difficult to read. So my recommendation is have fewer so you can understand them. So I'm going to take out these EMAs and just look at the Bollinger Bands per se. So what it's really saying is this line, the line in the middle, is the 20 period moving average. This particular line is the 20 period moving average. And what we are seeing here is that there is two standard deviation variations, and most of the candles are really in the upper standard deviation. Very clearly showing that, one, the market is definitely overstretched, right? You see a lot of these even going out of the band, but also that it's extremely bullish, that all the movement is really up top. Now, do bear in mind that Bollinger Bands are by no means confirmatory signals that you should use to go and make your buying and selling decisions. What they should really be used for is, in my opinion, just sort of entry triggers or entry points, right? So for example, if you see the strong movement here and it's towards the edge of the two standard deviation variance, it's a good point perhaps to enter in here if you're a swing trader, or if it's moved back towards the 20 MA line and the overall trend is still bullish, then you want to wait till there and enter in to ride the wave or ride the trend. So those are usually things that you should watch out for or look for. But other than that, I think it's not worthwhile to read too much into it. Now let's look at Cake. Yeah, let's look at Cake. Cake is a newer instrument, so there isn't so much of rich data to really calculate even a 50 period MA, I think, because this came into existence on 19th of Feb, and today is not even 50 days from then. So I'm sure if I add the 50 MA, let me take this out. So let's add moving average. Let's get a couple of these. So instead of a 9, let me look at, okay, here you go. So make it 20 period MA. And then the other one, I'm having some trouble with my cursor here, so bear with me. And this one is a 50 period. So see, there is no 50 period chart really here because it hasn't been 50 days, and even the 20 period is extremely recent. So this one we don't learn too much. We don't see too much here in terms of the moving averages because again we don't have enough data. What we can do is we can just look at a couple of different things here in the chart, and in some sense just eyeball it to understand how the prices have been moving. If you look at Cake's price, for the most part, it appears to me like the $11 range, wherever it is right now, roughly, is in some sense a line of support. Now, again, there isn't enough data point, so by no means should you treat this as confirmatory, but I see that this is where it is heading at the moment, right? So you have roughly around $11 as the sort of support range. And then if you start looking at the movements, the candles have been rather small. So I don't see a lot of price volatility at the movement. My basic sense for an early instrument, which is not very volatile, is that it's probably going through a phase of accumulation or sort of, discovery, where buyers and sellers are still trying to figure out what the right price for this instrument is. And although, again, like I said, I'm going to put that as a qualifier here. It's very difficult to say which direction this will go, but I have a feeling that you would see some sort of a big movement. It's possible that it'll move up very aggressively, or it might just break down into lower levels. So I think that's my take as far as Cake goes. It's still early. I think that Binance chain and its whole sort of swap story is still emerging. It's very new. And I think this month and maybe next month would become clearer in terms of where the story is headed. If you start seeing a lot more traction, if you start seeing a lot of interest from buyers, you might see this go up way upwards parabolically like most of these others have gone, both UNI and Sushi. Or it's also possible that it may not have that sort of a fate at all and would have a completely different fate, right? So that's something that we will figure out over the next 2 weeks is how I think. Now, if you look at this, I just happened to glance here. It seems like TradingView is saying it's a strong sell. So TradingView isn't happy with the candles for sure with Cake. I wouldn't make such a strong recommendation in either case, but anyway, we're not trying to make any recommendations. We're just looking at the chart and saying this is what we see.
Well, this is definitely a comparison I'd like to check in on once there is some more data in a couple of weeks' time, perhaps a month from now, and yeah, let's look at it again.
Absolutely, yeah. I think this is worthwhile to look at. In some sense, I would also say that this is, in some sense, a leading indicator of where the Binance chain is headed, right? So PancakeSwap is one of the most popular applications on Binance chain. And if you see a lot of positive momentum in its direction, I think it's in some sense confirmation that, yes, there is a lot of activity on Binance chain. And therefore, you might also see price action in other places. But if we see this becoming, not so interesting, in some sense, it will also be a data point saying, well, maybe there is something else going on there. And, Binance chain or BSC isn't really taking off the way that it's expected to. But again, like I said, these are things to put on the watch, and we will see what the story is.
Great. Now, next we're going to dive into two of the DeFi kind of strongholds, obviously projects that have been building over many years now, so there's a lot of data for them. Do you want to start with AAVE?
Let's do that. Yeah. So I think we have our lines from last week. We drew these lines of support and resistance, right? We looked at, I think, 302 as a line of support. And then I think we did see prices testing roughly about 420 up here. Of course, the price for AAVE had gone all the way up to 581 at some point in time. Now, there's one thing to bear in mind when it comes to AAVE. AAVE is a place that has been seeing a lot of traction. In fact, the conversation around DeFi really centers around some of these venues, and AAVE is one of them. You know, there's Compound, there's AAVE, there's Maker, there is, you know, few others. But I think AAVE certainly is one of the leaders in the pack. You know, it's a big sort of collateralization and lending market. So my sense is that I think this token would start getting valued more like you know, how you would value a stock, more or less, because, you know, stocks are usually valued with you know, sort of the discounted dividends model, if you may, right? You expect a certain amount of earnings, you expect a certain amount of growth in a particular company, and then you discount that down to current day, and you know, you make your conclusion saying, well, this is the right price for it, right? So it won't be really that same one-on-one, because this is not really a stock, so to speak. But having said that, it does have similar characteristics. So people are going to watch the growth numbers, people are going to watch the adoption numbers, and people are going to watch the revenue numbers around holders of the AAVE token, and that will definitely get factored into the valuation of AAVE. Now, if you look at the AAVE token, that's where I think it differs vastly from a coin like Bitcoin, for that matter, where there is a lot of value, which is what I would say faith-driven value, where people think it is of a certain value and therefore it is, right? Which is where I would say it follows the model that you would have of precious metals or, you know, commodities like gold. But in the case of AAVE, I think it's less of that and it's more of network usage. So we'll see it emerge. We'll see how that pans out. Now, in the current, just from a chart view, we mentioned last week that we saw the price getting a little more range bound, sort of moving between this 420 and 302 zone. The week really has just shown that it is still there, although it is right up there closer to the 420 zone. But there seems to be a consolidation phase here, right? Most of it is still between 302 and 420. We saw a little spike and an attempt to sort of go up. It broke through this 420 zone and it went all the way up to 450. But then there was a big red candle the next day and bringing price back into this range. So that speaks something, that says something, which essentially means that there's perhaps a strong resistance, or, you know, an area of resistance somewhere around here in the 420 to 450 zone. And unless AAVE breaks through that, I think you are likely to see it being bound by that as a factor. Let's also look at another indicator. I would just like to look at maybe something like MACD to see what it looks like. It didn't plot for me somehow. Okay. There seems to be a delay in it getting plotted, but anyway, we see it now. So here is a MACD line. Now, again, before we start looking at what this MACD is telling us about the AAVE token, I think let's just quickly review and make sure we are all on the same page on what the MACD does. So the MACD line is really, again, a momentum indicator. But in this case, what it does is it considers the difference between two moving averages. It takes the 12 and the 26 period moving average, EMAs, and the difference of that is what is plotted as the MACD chart. So, you know, all these charts that you see, the bar charts up here, are nothing but the difference between the 12 and the 26 period EMA. There is another line that comes in as a part of this whole indicator, and that is called the signal line. And that signal line is nothing but the 9-day EMA of the MACD itself. So in some sense, signal line is telling us what the MACD is doing more recently in terms of giving its 9-day moving average. And MACD itself is telling us how the two moving averages, the 12 and 26, are with respect to each other. Are they close enough? Are they moving far apart? right? Are they in positive territory or negative territory? So, obviously, if the periods where 12 period is more aggressive, that's more bullish, you'll start seeing these bars above the line. And, when there is bearish momentum, you start seeing the bars below the line. And if the bars are big, that means there is big difference, which is kind of evident between these lines as well. And therefore, there is like a big movement here. It's more volatile in these periods whenever the bar is big. When the bar is almost, too small to even notice, that this is where the volatility is super small, right? And so now if you look at this period here, it's very clear that the MACD indicator is essentially saying that this is almost zero to nothing volatility, very little volatility. See, the bars are so small here, right? With a little period of sort of positive upwards and a little period down, but both are just around the sort of baseline or zero line. So this is again an indicator that you are likely to see an aggressive price movement, either upwards or downwards. Again, this is a complete guess. This is absolutely no technical analysis here, but because the broader market is in a upwards trend, if one could make a fair guess that it's possible it will break upwards. But having said that, is something to watch. This is something that we'll try and figure out.
Yeah, that's interesting. So would you expect then that it might break out of that range, either upwards or downwards, before we look at it again next week?
That's what I would guess, like I said. But again, never say never. We don't know how the market will behave. So yes, we will look at it in hindsight and see how it behaved. But just looking at this chart and this range bound movement and very low volatility, it does look like it should see a break towards, sometime middle to end of this coming week.
Great.
Okay, let's go towards Maker. I'm going to keep the same charts just so that's also consistent to sort of view them together. They are not comparables, so to speak. Maker has been around much longer. Maker is essentially a algorithmic stable coin, as opposed to AAVE, which also does collateralization, but slightly different business model. And so I think if you look at Maker per se, there are a couple of factors that is worth considering. One is the overall demand, of course, of the Maker token. And the second is, of course, the amount of stable coin that is in circulation, because this is also used as a governance token for the stable coin DAI. Now, if you just look at the charts, like most cryptos, it has seen good positive upward momentum. Starting January, there has been some healthy moves up and some big bullish parabolic moves with periods of indecision, or very much smaller candles where both the buyers and the sellers have been struggling with each other. Right, it's almost like one day green and the other day red, and the next day green again, the next day red. So this is like the classic sort of period of indifference that we have been seeing. But I think that we are likely to see this change. Now, if you see it go down here, we saw this sort of downward momentum from here. And you saw this really sort of went down after this period of indifference. And like I was saying, usually when it comes to a period of indecision or low volatility, in this case, it wasn't necessarily low volatility, but it was range bound. It tends to break out of that and finds a new price point, either upwards or downwards. In this case, I found it downwards, and it almost retested the 50 EMA. So this was really a period where it sort of looked confusing. It looked sort of questionable whether it was making the right move. But now we see that I think it has come back to that second range, if you may. And let's try and see where it is now. So if you see here, see, this was one range, right? One range here. And now we have this second range. So in some sense, it has come down to a lower price point than where it was. It was closer to this 2,500 to 2,500 to 2,750. And now it's between, I would say, 2,300 to 2,000. So certainly this range has come to a lower level. The question now for Maker token as well would be, with this low period of volatility here, and you also see this in the MACD chart, right, with this sort of dying down of the volatility, is this going to break out? And which direction will it break out? Will it break out upwards or downwards? The Again, given the broader sort of markets, my sense is it's not going to break down too much. It will either remain range bound or it's likely to see a price movement upwards. That's at least my sort of sense at the moment. But again, this is not very clear. The charts are not telling an extreme clear story in this case.
Great. And we covered obviously BNB and a little bit of backstory last week as well around it kind of moving from an exchange token to essentially its own network token and the rise that it's seen. Yeah, I'd love to check in again now and see where it's at.
That's true, yeah, and this would be a good one to sort of wrap up today's session with. This BNB has seen some extremely interesting moves over the last few weeks. And as you rightly said, we covered it last week and we saw how it did this massive parabolic move early on. Pardon me for this again. So, here we saw this massive parabolic move and then a big correction, right? And it seemed like it had formed some sort of a floor, if you may, or a new support level around the 200, little over 200 mark. What we also noticed is that it was definitely respecting a very strong trend and, had tested the 20 EMA a few times. So, 20 EMA was tested here, all these were sort of close enough to the 20 EMA. The good news this week, and when I say the good news, it's purely from a standpoint of charting and prediction, is that it seems to still be respecting the 20 EMA. And in fact, neither has the gap widened too much. I don't see it like the charts being here, right? So it's not like this big a gap. It's close enough to 20 EMA. And it's also not tested it downwards. We don't see any breakdown into this between 20 and 50 EMA period. What that really says is that the trend is the same. The trend is strong. The trend is upwards. The trend is the same. And in some sense, it's what you would say it's stabilizing to these new price points. So when it moved all the way from $50, $70 to some $300 odd dollars, $380, it was a very aggressive upward movement. But now if you look at it, what's really happening is that it has found a nice stable price point around this 250, 275 type of zone. Currently it looks like it's at 265 and it's seen sort of a minor correction, which is, of course, with every instrument, it tests the price a little bit and, buyers and sellers continuously tussle to find the right price point. But in the broader sense of things, it is still within this nice, good range. Now, just to conclude on this, I have a feeling that this one is going to keep staying upwards. And the reason for this is the volatility is strong. The overall sort of BNB value proposition remains interesting. You start seeing other comparables, even if you look at an exchange comparable, and if you look at, let's say, Coinbase, which is going IPO, that is going at $100 billion IPO. And BNB market cap is probably about 40, 45 billion at the moment. If you look at ETH, which is the network that is trying to compete against, that has seen a large amount of traction. So I think if it continues to remain relevant, and it also has a strong BSC story or the Binance Smart Chain story, then I think Binance is definitely going to see a good, strong movement upwards. Now, having said that, again, like we've said, this is not investment advice. We are not saying you should go and buy BNB and it's going to make you money. We don't know. And we have no idea where it's going to go. Just saying that the price here is something that seems to tell that story, that it is forming a nice, strong upward movement. And we are seeing a healthy sort of movement around this 20 EMA. And so, for any swing traders and any long-term traders, I think you can trust the trend is what I would say for the moment, unless you start seeing newer indications that question it. So I think, yeah, that's all we've got pretty much for today, Paul.
Yeah, that was really interesting. And yeah, I mean, last week we focused a little bit more on the moving averages and the average true range. It was interesting to dive a bit into the MACD and see how that compares. But yeah, that does seem to be indicating some of the same trends we were seeing. So let's see how the next week plays out. It's anyone's game.
Absolutely, yeah. And in the future weeks, I think we can also relook at some of the old ones and newer indicators. Like there are some strategies where MACD and RSI can be combined and it tells you a story. Again, the way I look
Okay.
at it is all these indicators basically tell you a story, right? So we have seen some, they have told us a story, and it seems to be kind of making sense, if you may, in the broader scheme of things. And we will dig in some more next week and continue to learn.
Fantastic. Well, yeah, thank you for stepping us through that in a really nice, clear way so that we could understand it all. And yeah, definitely, if anyone has an asset that they would really like to see, drop it in the comments. We'll try to include that in one of the upcoming episodes.
Absolutely, yeah. We do want to cover things that the community wants to see. So absolutely, yeah.
Great. Well, thanks for your time again, Shanky. Talk to you again soon.
Thank you. Yeah, thanks, Paul. It was good. Okay.